Natsume Sōseki, 10 Nights of Dream, the 4th night. Something resembling a bench sits in the center of the large dirt-floored room, surrounded by a number of small stools. The bench glows a lustrous black. In one corner, an old man sits by himself in front of a square serving tray, drinking sake. The accompanying dish seems to be stewed vegetables. The old man's face is quite red from drinking. Moreover, his face is glossy smooth, with nothing you can call a wrinkle in sight. Only his long white beard tells me he is old. Child that I am, I wonder exactly how old this man is. Just then, the lady of the house brings in a bucket of water from the bamboo pipe and back and wipes her hands dry on the apron. "Old man, how old are you?" she asks. The old man swallows a huge mouthful of stewed vegetables before speaking. "I've forgotten how old I am," he says, nonplussed. Thrusting her hands inside her narrow obi, the lady of the house looked at the old man's face from the inside. The old man gulped sake from a vessel as large as a rice bowl, and exhaled long and hard through his white whiskers. This prompted the lady of the house to ask, "Old man, where do you call home?" "Right here, inside my belly button," he said, cutting his long exhalation short. Hands still inside her obi, she asked, "Well then, where are you headed?" The old man again gulped down hot sake from the vessel as large as a rice bowl and, just as before, exhaled long and hard. "Down the road a ways," he said. "Straight ahead?" she asked. At this, he again exhaled long and hard. His breath sailed out past the sliding shoji screen, slipped underneath the willow tree, and made for the riverside, straight ahead. The old man stepped outside. I followed him. A small gourd dangled from the old man's waist. From his shoulder hung a square box. He wore pale blue work pants and a pale blue shirt, sleeveless. His tabi socks, however, were bright yellow. They looked to be made from the skin of some kind of animal. The old man went straight ahead to the willow tree. Under the tree were 3 or 4 children. Smiling, the old man pulled out a tenugui, a long, narrow cloth from his waistband. He twisted it like a cord. This he placed on the ground in the center of the group and drew a wide circle around it. Finally, from the box hanging on his shoulder, he pulled out the sort of brass flute a candy peddler plays. "In a moment, that tenugui will turn into sake. Keep watching, he repeated. The children watched the twisted tenugui as if their lives depended on it. I watched it too. Keep watching, are you ready?" The man played his flute and walked round and round the circle. I had eyes only for that tenugui, yet it showed no sign of moving. The flute chirped as the old man blew into it. He walked round and round the circle. He circled stealthily, like one tiptoeing in straw sandals, as if wary of the cloth. He looked a little afraid, but also a little fascinated. Then suddenly the old man stopped playing his flute. He opened the lid on the box hanging from his shoulder, plucked up by the tenugui by its head, and quickly tossed it in. "When I do this, it will turn into a snake inside the box. I'll show you now, the old man said and began walking straight ahead. He emerged from under the willow and moved straight ahead down the narrow lane. I wanted to see the snake, and so I followed him down the lane. From time to time as he walked, the old man spoke, saying, "Any moment now," or "You'll see the snake." When we finally reached the river bank, the old man sang, "Any moment now, you'll see the snake. My flute will sound, he will awake." There were no bridges or boats in sight, so I thought he would stop here and he would show me the snake in the box, but the old man splashed straight into the river. At first the water came up to his knees, then gradually to his waist, and finally his chest disappeared. But still he walked straight ahead, singing, "It grows deeper now, as evening descends." I walked straight ahead. On that you can depend. His beard, then his face, then the crown of his head, and finally his kerchief all disappeared from view. I was certain that when he climbed up onto the far shore, the old man would show me the snake, and so I waited alone by the rustling reeds, waiting for a long, long time. But the old man never came to the surface again. The 5th night. This is the dream I had. Long, long ago, almost as far back as the age of gods, it seemed, I went off to war, but met only the misfortune of defeat and was taken prisoner. Now I was being hauled out and placed before the enemy chieftain. People back then were quite tall, and they all grew long beards. They wore leather belts onto which they hitched their stick-like swords. For bows, they employed what looked to be thick wisteria vines in their natural state, without lacquer or polish. It all seemed quite primitive. The enemy chieftain gripped the center of his bow with his right hand, its tip thrust into the grass. He sat atop something that resembled a sake jug turned upside down. When I looked up into his face, I saw that his two thick eyebrows met in the center, right above his nose. Razors were unknown in those days, of course. As a prisoner, a raised seat of any kind was out of the question. I sat cross-legged directly on the grass. On my feet I wore large straw boots. In those days, such boots were quite high. They came up to your kneecaps when you were standing. From the top dangled the tassels of an ornamental fringe of unwoven straw that rustled when you walk. The chieftain looked into my face by the firelight and asked if I would live or die. That was the custom in those days. They asked this of every prisoner. If you answered live, it meant you had surrendered. If you said die, you had refused to submit. I responded with a single word, die. The chieftain took the bow standing in the grass and threw it aside, and in one motion began to draw the stick-like sword hanging from his waist. The wind fanned the flames or the fire toward the blade. I opened my right hand like a maple leaf, the palm toward the chieftain, and raised it above my eyes. It was a signal that meant, wait. The chieftain returned his thick sword to its sheath with a clank. Even in those days we knew love. I tell him of a woman I wish to see before I die. The chieftain says he will wait until daybreak, until the rooster crows. I must summon the woman to come before the rooster crows. If the rooster crows before she arrives, I will be killed without seeing her. The chieftain stares at the campfire, seated as before. I am on the grass, my large straw boots crossed one over the other, awaiting the woman. The night grows deeper and deeper. From time to time we hear the sound of the logs collapsing in the fire. Each time the flames tumble out toward the chieftain, as if in a panic. Beneath his jet-black eyebrows, the chieftain's eyes shine brightly. Someone comes and tosses new logs onto the fire. In a moment, the fire crackles back to life, a fierce sound as if to drive back the darkness. At the same moment, the woman was leading a tall white horse she kept tethered to an oak tree behind her home. She patted the horse's mane 3 times and leapt nimbly onto its back. She rode bareback, with neither saddle nor stirrups. She kicked the horse's flanks with her long white legs, and it burst into a full gallop. Someone had replenished our fire so that it cast a dim, bright spot in the distant sky. The horse charged through the darkness, headed for that brightness, jets of steam shooting from its nostrils like 2 pillars of fire. The woman's slender legs kicked the horse's flanks without pause. The sound of speeding hoofs rang through the air. The woman's hair streamed behind her like a tail in the darkness, but still she did not reach our clearing lit by the fire. At that moment, from the side of the pitch-dark road came a rooster's crow. Kokoriko, koko, koke koko. Arching her body back, the woman yanked hard with both hands on the reins. With a clatter, the horse's front hooves etched themselves into the hard stone. Koke koko, crowed the rooster once more. The woman gasped and slackened her grip on the reins. The horse staggered onto its knees. Together with its rider, it stumbled forward. Beneath the cliff lay a deep abyss. The hoof prints can be seen to this day, etched on that stone. It was the demoness Ama-no-jaku who had mimicked the rooster's crow. And so as long as those hoof prints remain carved into that stone, Ama-no-jaku will be my mortal enemy. The 6th night. There was talk that the legendary medieval sculptor Unke was carving a set of Nio, the fierce guardian deities, outside the gate at Gokokuji Temple. And so while out on a stroll, I went to see for myself. Many people had gathered there before I arrived and were spouting a stream of irreverent commentary. 5 or 6 yards in front of the gate stands a great red pine. its trunk angling upward to conceal the roof tiles as it extends into the distant blue sky. The green of the pine and the red lacquer of the gate reflect off one another, a truly magnificent sight. Moreover, the pine is positioned perfectly. It cuts across the left-hand corner of the gate, and its branches spread ever wider as they reach up to the roof. It all looks somehow old-fashioned, as if we were back in the Kamakura period. But the people who have gathered to watch are, like me, creatures of the Meiji Era. Rickshaw men make up the largest contingent. No doubt they have come to kill time between customers. "Look how big it is," one exclaimed. "That's quite the job," another put it. A lot harder than making one of an ordinary person. As I was taking this all in, still another man spoke up. "Hey, isn't that a Neo statue? Is he really going to carve a Neo in this day and age? Really?" And here I thought all the statues were from the olden days. "How strong it looks," came a voice from the crowd. "You know what they say, since the olden days. They've always said, when it comes to strength, well, nobody's as strong as the Neo, even stronger than that old Yamato Takeru." This fellow had tucked up his kimono up into his sash and wore no hat. Not exactly your educated type. Utterly indifferent to the onlookers' comments, Unke worked his chisel and hammer. He never so much as glanced back at us. From his lofty perch, he intently carved out the area around the Neo's face. On his head sat a small lacquered cap, and the wide sleeves of his outfit, a formal Suo robe, perhaps, were hitched together across his back. His whole appearance reeked of the olden days, completely out of sync with the restless crowd of onlookers. How, I wondered, could Unke still be alive in this day and age? Wonders never cease, I mused as I stood watching. But Unke himself appeared to feel nothing strange or odd about this. His entire being was focused on his work. One young fellow, taking in his remarkable equanimity, turned to me and said, "Well, that's what you'd expect of someone like Unke, isn't it? He doesn't even see us. Such composure, as if the only heroes left in the world were the Neo and himself. Splendid." These words pricked my interest. I glanced over at the young man. "Look at how he wields his chisel and hammer," he continued without pause. "He's attained complete freedom, as if he's in another world." Unke now carved alongside the inch-high eyebrow, striking the moment the chisel's blade was in position. Thick splinters flew each time the hammer sang. As the hardwood was chipped away, the edge of a flared nostril suddenly came into view. In applying the blade, Unke appeared utterly self-assured, as if he harbored not even the slightest doubt. I was awestruck. "It's really something," I explained as if to myself. He seems so nonchalant wielding that chisel, and yet he produces exactly the kind of eyebrow and nose he wants." The same young man replied, "His chisel isn't what creates them. To get that kind of eyebrow or nose, they have to be embedded within the tree from the start. He just uses the chisel and hammer to extract them. It's like digging bones from the ground. You find what's already there." It struck me at that moment that sculpture was exactly that sort of thing. And if this was the case, I realized, then anyone could do it. Seized by the urge to carve my own Neo, I quit gawking and headed straight for home. Grabbing the chisel and hammer from my toolbox, I went out back, where the woodmen had cut and stacked logs for firewood from an oak tree that had been felled by a storm a few days earlier. I chose the biggest one and started carving away, but unfortunately encountered no guardian deities. No luck with the next one either. I carved but found nothing. Nor was there a Neo in the third log. I ended up carving my way through the entire stack of firewood, but not a single log harbored a Neo within. That's when I realized that the trees of our Meiji era had no guardian deities inside them. And at last I began to understand why Unke had lived on until the present day. The seventh night. For some reason I am riding on an enormous ship. The ship cuts across the waves day and night without pause, belching black smoke. It makes a tremendous noise, but I have no idea where it is headed. All I know is that each morning the sun, glowing red like fire tongs, emerges from beneath the waves. It rises until it is straight above the high mast, where it stays for a spell before sailing on ahead of our enormous ship. Finally, hissing like those red-hot tongs, it sinks back beneath the waves. Each time the distant blue waves boil up, as red as sappan wood. The ship gives a great roar and plunges ahead in pursuit, but we never managed to catch up. One time, I got a hold of a crewman and asked him, "Is this ship headed west?" The crewman stared at me suspiciously before throwing a question back in my direction. "Why?" "Because we seem to pursue the setting sun." The ship crewman laughed loudly and walked away. I heard voices chanting, "The sun journeys to the west, ending up in the east. Can this be true? The sun rises from the east, returning to the west, home to the west. Can this be true? My home is on the waves. I lay my pillow by the helm. Sail away, sail away." I walked to the bow, and found a large number of crew members gathered there, hauling in the thick halyard. I felt terribly anxious. Would I ever make landfall again? Where were we headed? The only thing certain was that we were cutting through the waves, the ship belching black smoke. The waves were vast and spread in every direction. They were blue as far as I could see. From time to time they would turn purple. The water around the ship was white with foam. I felt terribly anxious. I began to think that it might be better to throw myself overboard and die than to remain on board the ship. I had many fellow passengers. Most seemed to be foreigners. Their faces, however, all looked different. Once, when the skies clouded over and the ship began to rock, a woman leaned against the railing and wept incessantly. I could see the white of the handkerchief with which she dabbed at her eyes. The Western-styled dress she wore was a calico print of some sort. Seeing this woman, I realized that I was not alone in my sadness. One evening I went on deck by myself to take in the stars. A foreigner approached me and asked if I knew astronomy. I was desperate, considering death. What need had I for the likes of astronomy? I held my silence. Then the foreigner related to me the story of the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, at the pinnacle of the constellation Taurus. He told me that the stars and the seas were all created by God. Finally, he asked if I believed in God. Gazing at the sky, I held my tongue. Another time I went into the salon and found a young woman in a showy outfit, playing the piano with her back to me. Near her, a tall, refined gentleman stood, singing. His mouth was unusually wide. The two seemed utterly indifferent to everything around them, as if they had even forgotten they were on board a ship. My despair deepened. In the end, I resolved to die. One evening, when no one was about, I did it. I leapt into the sea. And yet, the moment my feet left the deck, the moment my connection to the boat was severed, I felt a sudden yearning for life. From the bottom of my heart, I regretted my action. But it was too late. Like it or not, I was going to plunge into the sea. The ship now seemed remarkably tall. Though my body had left it, somehow my feet never hit the water. There was nothing I could grab onto as the water drew closer and closer. I tried to retract my feet, but still it drew closer. The water was black. Meanwhile, the ship had sailed on, belching black smoke and leaving me behind. For the first time it dawned on me that it was better to be on board the ship, even if its destination was unknown. But that realization was now of no use, as I fell silently toward the black waves, wrapped in infinite terror and regret. The 8th night. When I stepped into the barber shop, a cluster of 3 or 4 figures dressed in white called out, "Welcome," in unison. Standing in the center, I looked around and saw that it was a square room. Windows opened on 2 sides, while mirrors were hung on the other 2 walls. I counted the number of mirrors. There were 6 in all. I sat down in front of one. As I settled in, the plush seat sighed under my weight. Such a comfortable chair. My face shone clearly in the mirror, and I could see the reflection of a window behind me as well. The lattice on the shop's front counter appeared to be standing at an angle. No one was behind it. I had a good view from the waist up of the people walking past on the street outside the window. Shotaro walked by in the company of a woman. Had he bought himself a Panama hat and found himself a woman? This was all news to me. They both looked quite pleased with themselves. I wanted to get a good look at the woman's face, but just then they disappeared from view. Next, a tofu seller walked past, blowing his horn. He held the horn to his mouth, and his cheeks were puffed up as if stung by bees. They were swollen like that when he disappeared from view. The image stuck with me. It was as if he spent his whole life being stung. A geisha appeared. She had not yet put on her makeup. Her Shimada-style chignon hung loose, so that her head seemed somehow undone. Her face looked sleepy, too. She looked so poorly that I felt sorry for her. But then she made a little bow and mumbled something. Her interlocutor never appeared in the mirror. Just then a large man in white came up behind me, scissors and comb in hand, and began examining my head. I toyed with my wisp of a mustache and asked whether he thought he could make something of it. Without a word, the man in white tapped my head softly with the amber comb. And do the top of my head too, of course. But tell me, do you think you can make something of it? I asked. Still without answering, the man in white went to work, snip, snip, with his scissors. I wanted to keep my eye on every image reflected in the mirror, but each snip of the scissors sent black hair tumbling down my face. This rattled me so I closed my eyes. That's when the man in white spoke. Sir, did you happen to see the goldfish seller out front? I replied that I had not. The man in white said nothing more as he intently snipped away with the scissors. Suddenly a loud voice shouted, "Watch out!" My eyes popped open, and the wheel of a bicycle came into view under the man's white sleeve. Then the shaft of a rickshaw. No sooner had I spotted these than the man in white took my head in his hands and turned it sharply to one side. I lost sight of the bicycle and rickshaw. The snip-snip of the scissors resumed. Presently the man in white came round to the side and began trimming around my ear. The hair stopped falling forward, so I could safely open my eyes. From quite nearby came a voice crying out, "Mochi cakes with millet, mochi, mochi." I could hear a small mallet rhythmically pounding the mortar, making the mochi cakes. I hadn't seen a mochi seller since childhood and wanted to see what he looked like, but he never appeared in the mirror. Only the sound of him pounding the mochi. I strained to see down to the corner of the mirror. A woman was now sitting behind the counter. She was large in stature, with thick eyebrows of a dull black color, and her hair done in the ichōgaishi style. Her kimono had a black satin collar. She sat with one knee drawn up, counting a pile of cash. They seemed to be 10-yen bills. Narrowing her eyes and pursing her thin lips, she counted out loud, as if her life depended on it, reciting the numbers in rapid succession. But no matter how many she counted, she never seemed to reach the end. There appeared to be 100 or so bills resting on her knee. No more. Yet no matter how she counted, the same 100 bills remained. Dumbfounded, I stared at the woman's face and the 10-yen notes, whereupon the man in white announced loudly in my ear, "Let's wash your hair now." The timing was perfect. As soon as I stood up from the chair, I took the opportunity to steal a glance back at the front counter, but I could see no woman, nor any 10-yen bills. When I stepped outside after paying, to the left of the entrance I found a row of 5 oval buckets. In them swam many goldfish, red goldfish, spotted goldfish, skinny goldfish, plump goldfish. The goldfish seller was behind them. He stared at the goldfish displayed in front of him, sitting motionless with his chin on his hands. The bustling thoroughfare seemed to make no impression on him. I stood there for a while, gazing at the goldfish seller. The whole time I watched him, that goldfish seller sat perfectly still. The 9th night. The world had grown restless. War might break out at any moment. Day and night, it felt as if unsaddled horses, burned out of their stables, were galloping frantically around the manor, as if day and night foot soldiers were clamoring after them. Yet inside the house all was silent and calm. In the house were a young mother and her 3-year-old child. The father was away. He had left in the depths of the moonless night. Sitting on the floor inside the house, he had pulled down his straw sandals and donned a black hood before departing through the kitchen door at the back of the house. At the time, the light from the paper lantern held by the mother shone long and narrow, illuminating the ancient cypress that stood before the hedge. The father had not returned since. Each day the mother would ask her 3-year-old, "Where is father?" The child at first said nothing. After a while he began to respond, "Away." When the mother asked, "When will he return?" the child would laugh and answer again, "Away." When that happened, the mother laughed too. She tried and tried to teach the child to say, "He will return soon." But the child only managed to remember "soon." Sometimes, when asked, "Where is father?" the child would reply, "Soon." At night, after things had quieted down, the mother would retie her obi, tuck a short sword with a shark skin scabbard into it, strap the child to her back, and slip away through the side gate. The mother always wore straw sandals. Listening to the sound of those straw sandals, the child would sometimes fall asleep. If you descend to the west and follow the earthen walls that extend along the manor settlement to the very bottom of the gentle slope, you come to a tall ginkgo tree. If you turn right at this tree, you will find a stone torii shrine gate set back at a distance of 1 furlong. The path is surrounded by rice paddies, one on one side and bamboo grass on the other, and when you pass through the torii, you enter a dark cedar grove. Proceeding 20 yards further to the end of the stone pathway, you arrive at the steps that lead up to the old shrine. Above the faded gray offering box, a long rope hangs down from a large bell, and in daylight you can see beside the great bell a plaque declaring this to be a shrine to Hachiman, the god of war. The calligraphy for the character Hachi is unusual. It resembles a pair of doves set one against the other. There are other plaques in addition to this one. Most consist of archery targets with the bullseye shot out, accompanied by the name of the person who accomplished the feat. A few record shrine offerings of long swords. Every time she passes through the torii, an owl is hooting in the cedar treetops. Her simple straw sandals make a swishing sound as she walks. When that sound comes to a halt in front of the shrine, first the mother rings the bell, then she kneels and claps her hands together in prayer. Usually this is when the owl stops its hooting. The mother prays heart and soul for the safe return of her husband. The mother believes that because her husband is a samurai warrior, if she appeals in this way to Hachiman, the god of war must answer her prayers. The child often wakes at the sound of the bell. When it looks around and finds total darkness, it often bursts out crying. At such times the mother, still mouthing her prayers, rocks and sways to pacify the child on her back. Sometimes this works and the child stops crying, but other times the child only cries more violently. In either case, the mother is unwilling to abandon her task. Once she has completed the supplications for her husband's well-being, the woman loosens her narrow obi and swings the child around from back to front. Cradling the child in both hands, she then climbs up to the shrine, her cheek nestled against the child's. "Be a good child," she says, "and wait here just a little while." Straightening her narrow obi, she ties one end to the child and the other to the shrine railing. After that, she makes her way down the staircase and carries out the ancient ritual offering, pacing the 20-yard length of the stone pathway back and forth 100 times. Tethered in the darkness, the child crawls on the veranda as far as the narrow obi will allow. Should that be all, it is for the mother a very easy night. But should the child cry and wail, the mother grows flustered. She rushes too quickly through the 100-path ritual. She struggles to catch breath. When it can't be helped, she halts midway, climbs back up to the shrine to calm the child, and then restarts the ritual from the beginning. In this way, the mother spent night after night, fretting and sleepless with worry about her husband, but he was already long dead, killed by a masterless samurai. I heard this sad story in a dream from Mother. The 10th night. On the evening of the 7th day after Shōtaro was swept away by that woman, he unexpectedly returned home, broke out into a fever, and took to bed, or so Ken informed me. Shōtaro is the most handsome man in the neighborhood, and an extremely conscientious, honest person. He has only one indulgence. He likes to don his Panama hat and, when evening comes, sit in front of the fruit stand and watch the faces of the women who pass by on the street. In fact, he gets quite engrossed in this. Otherwise, he has no particular quirks worth mentioning. When there aren't any women passing by, rather than watch the street, he will study the fruit. There are all kinds, white peaches, apples, loquats, and bananas, all neatly arranged in 2 rows of baskets ready to be given as gifts. Looking at the baskets, Shōtaro comments on how nice they look. If he were to go into business, he said, it would have to be a fruit shop. But the truth is, he just likes to wear his Panama hat and takes things easy. These are a nice color, he'll sometimes say, admiring the summer mandarin oranges. And yet not once has he ever spent his pocket change on fruit. That means, of course, he cannot taste them. So he praises their color instead. One evening, out of the blue, a woman appeared in the front of the shop. She seemed to be of a certain status, judging from her elegant attire. The color of her kimono held a powerful appeal for Shōtaro. On top of that, he found her face quite attractive, and so he doffed his precious Panama hat and politely greeted her, whereupon the woman pointed to the largest of the fruit baskets, saying, "I'll take that one." Without pause, Shōtaro picked up the basket and handed it to her. The woman tested its weight and announced, "It's awfully heavy." Shōtaro is at heart a man of leisure, but he is also an extraordinarily amiable fellow, and so he replied, "Well then, may I carry it to your home for you?" He left the fruit store in the company of the woman, and that was that. He didn't return. Now, even for Shōtaro, this was entirely too casual. "Something is not right," said his relatives and friends, all of them concerned. So after his unexpected return on the evening of the 7th day, they gathered around and pressed him. "Sho-san, where in the world did you go?" Shōtaro answered that he had taken a train with the woman up into the mountains. It was a very long train ride. According to Shōtaro, when they got off the train, they came upon a field, a vast field with green grass as far as they could see. He walked across the grass with the woman until, without warning, they came to the top of the steep cliff. "Why don't you jump from here?" the woman said. When Shōtaro peeked over the edge, he could see only the side of the cliff, but not the bottom. Once more he doffed his Panama hat and politely declined. After such refusals, the woman finally said, "If you don't go ahead and jump, you'll be licked by pigs. How would you like that?" Now, there are 2 things in the world that Shōtaro couldn't stand: pigs and the balladeer Kumo-emon. Yet neither was worth giving up one's life for, so of course he refused to jump. Well, along comes a pig, grunting through its snout. Shōtaro had no choice but to strike its snout with the slender beetle palm walking stick he carried. Squealing, the pig tumbled headlong over the cliff. No sooner had Shōtaro breathed a sigh of relief than along came another pig, nuzzling its big snout against him. Shōtaro had no choice but to once more swing his stick. The pig squealed, and just like its predecessor, tumbled headlong off the cliff, whereupon yet another pig appeared. Shōtaro looked out over the grassy expanse, only to see, to his surprise, an endless line of pigs, countless, numbering in the tens of thousands perhaps, all grunting as they headed toward him atop the cliff. He felt terror well up from the bottom of his heart. But what could he do? As the pigs approached one by one, he deftly thwacked each on the snout with his walking stick. Strangely, the moment he touched their snouts with the stick, the pigs tumbled headfirst over the cliff. When he peeked over the edge of the seemingly bottomless cliff, he saw a long string of pigs falling headlong, straight down. Could he really have dispatched that many pigs over the edge? Shōtaro grew quite frightened at what he had done. But still the pigs kept coming. Like a black cloud, they trampled across the graying grass, a seemingly infinite supply of snouts, everyone grunting. Desperately summoning up his courage, Shōtaro batted away at those pigs' snouts for 7 days and 6 nights. Eventually, though, his vigor waned. His hand and arms turned to jelly, and in the end the pigs began to lick him. to lick him. He collapsed atop the cliff. Having reached this point in his story, Ken commented, "And that's why it's a bad idea to ogle women like that." This was only common sense, I thought. Yet Ken went on to say that he hoped to get his hands on Shotaro's Panama hat. It seems Shotaro is beyond help. That Panama hat will probably go to Ken in the end.